Section 64 of All About Coffee. This is a Librivox recording or Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Blue Bowser, Dessau, March 2022. All About Coffee by William Ukers. Chapter 35. World's Coffee Manners and Customs. Part 1. How coffee is roasted, prepared and served in all the leading civilized countries, the Arabian coffee ceremony, the present-day coffee houses of Turkey, 20th century improvements in Europe and the United States. Coffee manners and customs have shown little change in the Orient in the 600-odd years since the coffee drink was discovered by Sheikh Omar in Arabia. As a beverage for Western peoples, however, and more particularly in America, there have been many improvements in making and serving it. A brief survey of the coffee conventions and coffee service in the principal countries where coffee has become a fixed item in the dietary is presented here, with a view to show how different peoples have adapted the universal drink to their national needs and preferences. To proceed in alphabetical order, and beginning with Africa, coffee drinking is indulged in largely in Abyssinia, Algeria, Egypt, Portuguese East Africa, and the Union of South Africa. Coffee manners and customs in Africa. In Abyssinia and Somaliland, among the native population, the most primitive methods of coffee making still obtain. Here, the wandering Gala still mix their pulverized coffee beans with fats as a food ration, and others of the native tribes favor the kisher, or beverage made from the toasted coffee hulls. An hour's boiling produces a straw-colored decoction of a slightly sweetish taste. Where the Arabian customs have taken root, the drink is prepared from the roasted beans after the Arabian and Turkish method. The white inhabitants usually prepare and serve the beverage as in the homeland, so that it is possible to obtain it after the English, French, German, Greek or Italian styles. Adaptations of the French sidewalk coffees and of the Turkish coffee house may be seen in larger towns. In the equatorial provinces of Egypt and in Uganda, the natives eat the raw berries, or first cook them in boiling water, tie them in the sun, and then eat them. It is a custom to exchange coffee beans in friendly greeting. Individual earthen vessels for making coffee, painted red and yellow, are made by some of the native tribes in Abyssinia, and usually accompany disciples of Islam when they journey to Mecca, where the vessels find a ready sale among the pilgrims, most of whom are coffee devotees. Turkish and Arabian coffee customs prevail in Algeria and Egypt, modified to some extent by European contact. The Moorish cafes of Cairo, Tunis and Algiers have furnished inspiration and copy for writers, artists and travelers for several centuries. They change little with the years. The mazagran, sweetened cold coffee to which water or ice has been added, originated in Algeria. Probably took its name from the fortress of the same name, reserved to France by the Treaty of the Tafna in 1837. It is said that the French colonial troops were first served with a drink made from coffee syrup and cold water, or marches near Mazagran, formerly spelled Massagran. Upon their return to the French capital, they introduced the idea, with the added fillip of service in tall glasses, in their favorite cafes, what became known as Café Mazagran. Variants are coffee syrup with seltzer and with hot water. This fashion of serving coffee in glasses, says Chardin, has no raison d'être, and nothing can justify abandoning the cup of coffee. In the principal streets and public squares of any town in Algeria, it is a common sight to find a group of Arabs squatting about a portable stove, and a table on which cups are in readiness to receive the boiling coffee. The thirsty Arab approaches the dealer, and for a modest sum he gets his drink and goes his way, unless he prefers to go inside the cafe, where he may get several drinks and linger over them, sitting on a mat with his legs crossed and smoking his cheap book. Indeed, This is a typical scene throughout the Near East, where sheds or coffee tents, sketches of the more pretentious coffee houses, coffee shops and itinerant coffee vendors are to be met at almost every turn. In an unpublished work, Baron Antoine Rousseau and T.H. Roland Debussy have the following description of a typical Moorish café at Algiers. We entered without ceremony into a narrow deep cave decorated with the name of the café. On the right and on the left, along its length, were 2 benches covered with mats, notched cups, tongs, a box of brown sugar, all placed near a small stove, completed the furniture of the place. In the evening, the dim light from a lamp hanging from the ceiling shows the indistinct figures of a double row of natives listening to the nasal cadences of a band who play in a pizzicato accompaniment on small 3-stringed violins. Here, as in Europe, the cafés are the providential rendezvous for idlers and gossips, exchanges for real estate brokers and players at cards. Europeans recently arrived frequent them particularly. Some go only to satisfy their curiosity, others out of an inborn scorn for the customs of civilization. They go to sleep as Frenchmen, they awake Mohammedans. Their love for Turkish art only leads them to haunt the native shops and to affect oriental poses. If we quit for a moment the interior of the city to follow between 2 hedgerows of mastics or aloes, one of those capricious paths which lead one now up to the summit of a hill, now to the depth of some ravine, very soon the tones of a rustic flute, the modulations of a doo-wop, will betray some cool and peaceful retreat, some rustic café, easily recognized by its facade, pierced with large openings. To my eyes, nothing equals the charm of these little buildings, scattered here and there along the edges of a stream, sheltered under the thick foliage, and constantly enlivened by the coming and going of the husbandman of the neighborhood. Certain old Moors from the neighboring districts, fleeing the noises of the city, are the faithful habitués of these agreeable retreats. Here they install themselves at dawn and know how to enjoy every moment of the day with tales of their travels and youthful adventures, and many a legend for which their imagination takes all the responsibility. Gérome's painting of the coffee house at Cairo, which hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, gives one a good idea of the atmosphere of the Egyptian coffee. The preparation and service is modified Turkish Arabian. The coffee is ground to a powder, boiled in an ibrik with the addition of sugar, and served frothing in small cups. Storytellers, singers and dancers furnish amusement as of yore. The Oriental customs have not changed much in this respect. Trolley cars, victorias and taxis may have replaced the donkeys in the new sections of the larger Egyptian cities, but in old Alexandria and Cairo, the approach to the native coffee house is as dirty and as odorous as ever. Coffee is always served in all business transactions. Nowadays, the Egyptian woman chew gum and the man smokes cigarettes. French department stores offer bargain sales and the hotels advertise tea dances. But the Egyptian coffee drink is still the tiny cup of coffee grounds and sugar that it was 300 years ago, when sugar was first used to sweeten coffee in Cairo. In Portuguese East Africa, the natives prepare and drink coffee after the approved African native fashion, but the white population follows European customs. In the Union of South Africa, Dutch and English customs prevail in making and serving the beverage. Manners and customs in Asia. Arabia the Happy deserves to be called the Blessed, if only for its gift of coffee to the world. Here it was that the virtues of the drink were first made known. Here the plant first received intensive cultivation. After centuries of habitual use of the beverage, we find the Arabs, now as then one of the strongest and noblest races of the world, mentally superior to most of them, generally healthy and growing old so gracefully that the faculty of the mind seldom gives way sooner than those of the body. They are an ever-living earnest of the healthfulness of coffee. The Arabs are proverbially hospitable. and the symbol of their hospitality for 1,000 years has been the great drink of democracy, coffee. Their very houses are built around the cup of human brotherhood. William Ukers, writing on Arabian philosophy, manners and customs, says, "The principal feature of an Arab house is the kahwa, or coffee room. It is a large apartment spread with mats and sometimes furnished with carpets and a few cushions. At one end is a small furnace or fireplace for preparing coffee. In this room the men congregate. Here guests are received and even lodged. Women rarely enter it except at times when strangers are unlikely to be present. Some of these apartments are very spacious and supported by pillars. One wall is usually built transversely to the compass direction of the Kaaba, sacred shrine of Mecca. It serves to facilitate the performance of prayer by those who may happen to be in the Kaaba at the appointed times. Several rounds of coffee without milk or sugar, but sometimes flavored with cardamom seeds, are served to the guest at first welcome, and coffee may be had at all hours between meals or whenever the occasion demands it. Always the beans are freshly roasted, pounded and boiled. The Arabs average 25 to 30 cups, finjans, a day. Everywhere in Arabia there are to be found cafes where the beverage may be bought. Those of the lower classes are thronged throughout the day. In front there is generally a porch or bench where one may sit. The rooms, benches and little chairs lack the cleanliness and elegance of the one-time luxurious cafenettes of cities like Damascus and Constantinople, but the drink is the same. There is not in all Yemen, at a single market town or hamlet, where one does not find upon some simple hut the legend shed for drinking coffee. The Arab drinks water before taking coffee, but never after it. Once in Syria, says a traveller, I was recognized as a foreigner because I asked for water just after I had taken my coffee. If you belonged here, said the waiter, you would not spoil the taste of coffee in your mouth by washing it away with water. It is an adventure to partake of coffee prepared in the open, at a roadside inn or khan, in Arabia by an Araba or diligence driver. He takes from his saddlebag the ever-present coffee kit, containing his supply of green beans, of which he roasts just sufficient on a little perforated iron plate over an open fire, deftly taking off the beans, one at a time, as they turn the right colour. Then he pounds them in a mortar, boils his water in the long, straight-handled open boiler, or ibrik, a sort of brass mug or shefzi, tosses in the coffee powder, moving the vessel back and forth from the fire as it boils up to the rim, and, after repeating this manoeuvre 3 times, pours the contents foaming merrily into the little egg-like serving cups. Café Sultan or Kisha, the original decoction made from dried and toasted coffee hulls, is still being drunk in parts of Arabia and Turkey. Coffee in Arabia is part of the ritual of business as in other Oriental countries. Shopkeepers serve it to the customers before the argument starts. Recently, a New Yorker barber got some valuable publicity because he regaled his customers with tea and music. It was old stuff. The Arabian and Turkish barber shops have been serving coffee, tobacco and sweetmeats to their customers for centuries. For a faithful description of the ancient coffee ceremony of the Arabs, which, with slight modification, is still observed in Arabian homes, we turn to Palgrave. First, he describes the dwelling and then the ceremony. The Kaaba was a large oblong hall about 20 feet in height, 15 in length and 16 or thereabouts in breadth. The walls were coloured in a ruddily decorative manner with brown and white wash, and sunk here and there into small triangular recesses destined to the reception of books. So of this Garfield at least had no overabundance, lamps and other such-like objects. The roof of timber and flat, the floor was strewed with fine clean sand and garnished all around alongside of the walls with long strips of carpet, upon which cushions, covered with faded silk, were disposed at suitable intervals. In poorer houses, felt rugs usually take the place of carpets. In one corner, namely the furthest removed from the door, stood a small fireplace, or to speak more exactly furnace, formed of a large square block of granite or some other hard stone, about 20 inches each way. This is hollowed inwardly into a deep funnel, open above and communicating below with a small horizontal tube or pipe hole through which the air passes, bellows driven, to the lighted charcoal piled up on a grating about halfway inside the cone. In this manner, the fuel is soon brought to a white heat, and the water in the coffee pot placed upon the funnel's mouth is readily brought to boil. The system of coffee furnaces is universal in Diouf and Jebel Shomer, but in Nejet itself, and indeed in whatever other yet more distant regions of Arabia I visited to the south and east, the furnace is replaced by an open fireplace, hollowed in the ground floor, with a raised stone border and dog irons for the fuel and so forth, like what may be yet seen in Spain. This diversity of arrangement, so far as Arabia is concerned, is due to the greater abundance of firewood in the south, whereby the inhabitants are enabled to light up on a larger scale, whereas throughout the Diouf and Jebel Shomer wood is very scarce, and the only fuel at hand is bad charcoal, often brought from a considerable distance and carefully husbanded. This corner of the kava is also the place of distinction, whence honour and coffee radiate by progressive degrees round the apartment, and hereabouts accordingly sits the master of the house himself, or the guests whom he more especially delighteth to honour. On the broad edge of the furnace or fireplace, as the case may be, stands an ostentatious range of copper coffee pots, varying in size and form. Here in the Diouf their make resembles that in vogue at Damascus, but in Nejet and the eastern districts they are of a different and much more ornamental fashioning, very tall and slender, with several ornamental circles and mouldings in elegant relief, besides boasting long, beak-shaped spouts and high steeples for covers. The number of these utensils is often extravagantly great. I have seen a dozen at a time in a row by one fireside, though coffee-making requires in fact only 3 at most. Here in the Diouf 5 or 6 are considered to be the thing. For the south this number must be doubled. All this to indicate the riches and munificence of the owner, by implying the frequency of his guests and the large amount of coffee that he is in consequence obliged to have made for them. Behind the stove sits, at least in wealthy houses, a black slave, whose name is generally a diminutive in token of familiarity or affection. In the present case, it was Soilim, the diminutive of Selim. His occupation is to make and pour out the coffee. Where there is no slave in the family, the master of the premises himself, or perhaps one of his sons, performs that hospitable duty, rather a tedious one, as we shall soon see. We enter. On passing the threshold, it is proper to say Bismillah, for example, in the name of God. Not to do so would be looked on as a bad augury alike for him who enters and for those within. The visitor next advances in silence, till on coming about halfway across the room, he gives to all present, but looking specially at the master of the house, the customary Assalamu alaikum, or Peace be with you, literally on you. All this while everyone else in the room has kept his place, motionless and without saying a word. But on receiving the salam of etiquette, the master of the house rises, and if a strict Wahhabi, or at any rate desirous of seeming such, replies with a full-length traditionary formula, Alaykumu salamu hoi hamat ulai wa barakatuh, which is, as everyone knows, and with or on you be peace and the mercy of God and his blessings. But should he happen to be of anti-Wahhabi tendencies, the odds are that he will say marhaba or Allah wa salam, welcome or worthy and pleasurable, or the like, for of such phrases there is an infinite but elegant variety. All present follow the example thus given, by rising and saluting. The guest then goes up to the master of the house, who has also made a step or two forwards, and places his open hand in the palm of his host's, but without grasping or shaking, which would hardly pass for decorous, and at the same time each repeats once more his greeting, followed by the set phrases of polite inquiry, how are you, how goes the world with you, and so forth, all in a tone of great interest, and to be gone over 3 or 4 times, till one or other has the discretion to say Elhamdu Ilah, praise be to God, or in equivalent value, all right, and this is a signal for a seasonable diversion to the ceremonious interrogatory. The guest then, after a little contest of courtesy, takes his seat in the honoured post by the fireplace after an apologetical salutation to the black slave on the one side and to the nearest neighbour on the other. The best cushions and newest-looking carpets have been, of course, prepared for his honoured weight. Shoes or sandals, for in truth the latter alone are used in Arabia, are slipped off on the sand just before reaching the carpet, and there they remain on the floor close by. But the riding stick or wand, the inseparable companion of every true Arab, whether Bedouin or townsman, rich or poor, gentle or simple, is to be retained in the hand, and will serve for playing with during the pauses of conversation, like the van of our grandmothers in the days of conquest. Without delay, Zoe Lim begins his preparations for coffee. These open by about 5 minutes of blowing with a bellows and arranging the charcoal till a sufficient heat has been produced. Next, he places the largest of the coffee pots, a huge machine, and about 2/3 full of clear water, close by the edge of the glowing coal pit, that its contents may become gradually warm, while other operations are in progress. He then takes a dirty knotted rag out of a niche in the wall close by, and having untied it, empties out of it 3 or 4 handfuls of unroasted coffee, the which he places on a little trencher of plaited grass, and picks carefully out any blackened grains or other non-homologous substances, commonly to be found intermixed with the berries when purchased in groves. Then, after much cleansing and shaking, he pours the grain so cleansed into a large open iron ladle and places it all over the mouth of the funnel, at the same time blowing the bellows and steering the grains gently round and round till they crackle, redden, and smoke a little, but carefully withdrawing them from the heat long before they turn black or charred, after the erroneous fashion of Turkey or Europe, after which he puts them to cool a moment on the grass platter. He then sets the warm water in the large coffee pot over the fire aperture, that it may be ready boiling at the right moment, and draws in close between his own trouserless legs a large stone mortar with a narrow pit in the middle, just enough to admit the large stone pestle 4 foot long and 1.5 inches thick, which he now takes in hand. Next, pouring the half-roasted berries into the mortar, he proceeds to pound them, striking right into the narrow hollow with wonderful dexterity, nor ever missing his blow, till the beans are smashed but not reduced into powder. He then scoops them out, now reduced to a sort of coarse reddish grit, very unlike the fine charcoal dust which passes in some countries for coffee, and out of which every particle of real aroma has long since been burned or ground. After all these operations, each performed with as intense a seriousness and deliberate nicety as if the welfare of the entire Jove depended on it, he takes a smaller coffee pot in hand, fills it more than half with hot water from the larger vessel, and then shaking the pounded coffee into it, sets it on the fire to boil, occasionally steering it with a small stick as the water rises to check the ebullition and prevent overflowing. Nor is the boiling stage to be long or vehement. On the contrary, it is and should be as light as possible. In the interim, he takes out of another rag knot a few aromatic seeds called hale, an Indian product, but of whose scientific name I regret to be wholly ignorant, or a little saffron, and after slightly pounding these ingredients, throws them into the simmering coffee to improve its flavour, for such an additional spicing is held indispensable in Arabia, though often omitted elsewhere in the East. Sugar would be a totally unheard of profanation. Last of all, he strains off the liquor through some fibres of the inner palm bark placed for that purpose in the jug spout, and gets ready the tray for delicate party-coloured grass, and the small coffee cups ready for pouring out. All these preliminaries have taken up a good half hour. Meantime, we have become engaged in active conversation with our host and his friends, but our Shararat guide, Suleiman, like a true Bedouin, feels too awkward when among townsfolk to venture on the upper places, so repeatedly invited and accordingly has squatted down on the sand near the entrance. Many of Gafil's relations are present. Their silver-decorated swords proclaim the importance of the family. Others, too, have come to receive us for our arrival, announced beforehand by those we had met at the entrance pass. Is a sort of event in the town. The dress of some betokens poverty, others are better clad, but all have a very polite and decorous manner. Many a question is asked about our native land and town, that is to say, Syria and Damascus, conformably to the disguise already adopted, and which it was highly important to keep well up. Then follow inquiries regarding our journey, our business, what we have brought with us, about our medicines, our goods and wares, etc., etc. From the very first, it is easy for us to perceive that patients and purchases are likely to abound. Very few travelling merchants, if any, visit the Djoves at this time of year, for one must be mad or next door to it to rush into the vast desert around during the heats of June and July. I, for one, have certainly no intention of doing it again. Hence, we had small danger of competitors and found the market almost at our absolute disposal. But before a quarter of an hour has passed, and while Blackie is still roasting and pounding his coffee, a tall, thin lad, Gafil's eldest son, appears, charged with a large circular dish, grass-platted like the rest, and throws it with a graceful jerk on the sandy floor close before us. He then produces a large wooden bowl full of dates, bearing in the midst of the heap a cup full of melted butter. All this he places on the circular mat and says, Simor, literally pronounce the name. Of God, understood, this means set to work it did. Hereon the master of the house quits his place by the fireside and seats himself on the sand opposite to us. We draw nearer to the dish, and 4 or 5 others, after some respectful coyness, join the circle. Everyone then picks out a date or 2 from the juicy half-amalgamated mass, dips them into the butter, and thus goes on eating till he has had enough, when he rises and washes his hands. By this time the coffee is ready, and Zoe Lim begins his round, the coffee pot in one hand, the tray and cups on the other. The first pouring out he must in etiquette drink himself, by way of a practical assurance that there is no death in the pot. The guests are next served, beginning with those next the honourable fireside. The master of the house receives his cup last of all. To refuse would be a positive and unpardonable insult, but one has not much to swallow at a time, for the coffee cups, or finjans, are about the size of a large eggshell at most, and are never more than half filled. This is considered essential to good breeding, and a brimmer would here imply exactly the reverse of what it does in Europe. Why it should be so I hardly know, unless perhaps the rareness of cup stands or chafs, sea lanes, modern Egyptians, in Arabia, though these implements are universal in Egypt and Syria, might render an over-full cup inconveniently hot for the fingers that must grasp it without medium. Be that as it may, fill the cup for your enemy is an adage common to all Bedouins or townsmen throughout the peninsula. The beverage itself is singularly aromatic and refreshing, a real tonic, and very different from the black mud sucked by the Levantine or the watery roast bean preparations of France. When the slave or freeman, according to the circumstances, presents you with a cup, he never fails to accompany it with a sim, say the name of God, nor must you take it without answering Bismillah. When all have been thus served, a second round is poured out, but in inverse order, for the host this time drinks first and the guests last. On special occasions, at first reception for instance, the ruddy liqueur is a third time handed round, nay, a fourth cup is sometimes added, but all these put together do not come up to 1/4 of what a European imbibes in a single draught at breakfast. For a more recent pen picture of coffee manners and customs in Arabia, we turn to Charles M. Doughty's Travels in Arabia Deserta. Irfa ever demanded of her husband towards which part should the house be built. Dress the face, Said would answer, to this part, showing her with his hands the south. For if his booth face be all day turned to the hot sun, there will come in fewer young, loitering, and parasitical fellows that would be his coffee drinkers. Since the sheikh, or heads, alone receive their tribes, surah, it is not much that they should be to the arms of his coffee hosts. I have seen Said avoid them, as he saw them approach, or even rise ungraciously upon such men's presenting themselves. The half of every booth, namely the man's side, is at all times open, and any enter there that will, in the free desert. And then murmuring he tells them, Wallah, his affairs to call him forth. Adieu. He must away to the Majils. Go they and seek the coffee elsewhere. But were there any sheikh with them, a coffee lord, Said could not honestly choose but abide and serve them with coffee. And if he be absent himself, yet any sheikhly man coming to the sheikh's tent, coffee must be made for him, except he gently protest, Billah, he would not drink. Hirfa, a sheikh's daughter, and his nigh kinswoman, was a faithful maid to Said in all his sparing policy. Our men still now standing, the men step over to Said's coffee fire, if the sheikh be not gone forth to the mashlis to drink his midday cup there. A few gathered sticks are flung down beside the hearth. With flint and steel one stoops and strikes fire in tinder. He blows and cherishes those seeds for the cheerful flame, and some dry camel dung, sets the burning shred under dry straws, and powders over more dry camel dung. As the fire kindles, the sheikh reaches for his dalal, coffee pots, which are carried in the fatya, coffee gear basket. These people of a nomad life bestow each thing of theirs in a proper bait. It would otherwise be lost in their daily removings. One rises to go to fill up the pots at the water skins, or a bowl of water is handed over the curtain from the woman's side. The pot at the fire, Hirfa reaches over her little palmful of green coffee berries. These are roasted and brayed. As all is boiling, he sets out his little cups, fenjil or fenjin. When, with a pleasant gravity, he has unbuckled his kutiya or cup box, we see the nomad has not above 3 or 4 fenjins, wrapped in a rusty cloth, with which he scours them busily as if this should make his cups clean. The roasted beans are pounded amongst Arabs with a magnanimous rattle and, as all the labour, rhythmical, in press of the town, or an old wooden mortar, gaily studded with nails, the work of some nomad smith. The water bubbling in the small dalal, he casts in his fine coffee powder, el-bun, and withdraws the pot to simmer a moment. From a knot in his handkerchief he takes then a head of cloves, a piece of cinnamon, or other spice, bahar, and braying these, he casts the dust in after. Soon he pours out some hot drops to assay his coffee, if the taste be to his liking, making dexterously a nest of all the cups in his hand. With pleasant clattering, he is ready to pour out for all the company, and begins upon his right hand, the first, if such be present, to any considerable sheikh and principal persons. The fenjin kava is but 4 sips. To fill it up to a guest, as in the northern towns, where among Bedouins an injury, and of such bitter meaning, these drink though and depart. Then is often seen a contention and courtesy amongst them, especially in any greater assemblies, who shall drink first. Some man that receives the fenjin in his turn will not drink yet. He proffers it to one sitting in order under him, as to the more honourable, but the other putting off with his hand will answer, Ebitten, nay, I shall never be by Allah, but do thou drink. Thus licensed, the humble man is dispatched in 3 sips, and hands up his empty fenjin. But if he have much insisted, by this he opens his willingness to be reconciled with one not his friend. That neighbour, seeing the company of coffee drinkers watching him, may with an honest grace receive the cup, and let it seem not willingly. but any hard man will sometimes rebut the other's gentle brother. Some may have taken lower seats than becoming their shake blood, of which the nomads are jealous. Entering untimely, they sit down out of order sooner than trouble all the company. A shake, coming late, and any business going forward, will often sit far out in the assembly, and show himself a popular person in this kind of honourable humility. The more inward in the booth is, the higher place, where also is, with the shakes, the seat of a stranger. To sit in the loose circuit without and before the tent is for the common sort. A tribesman arriving presents himself at that part or a little lower, where in the eyes of all men his pretension will be well allowed, and in such observances of good nurture is a nomad's man honour among his tribesmen, and this is the nigh all that serves the nomad for a conscience, namely, that which man will hold of him. A poor person, approaching from behind, stands obscurely, wrapped in his tattered mantle, with grave ceremonial, until those sitting indolently before him in the sand shall vouchsafe to take notice of him. Then they rise unwillingly, and giving back enlarge the coffee circle to receive him. But if there arrive a sheikh, a coffee host, a rich herd amongst them of a few cattle, all the coxcomb companions within will hail him with a pleasant adulation. Tad, Henity, step thou up hither. The astute Fukhara sheikh surpasses all men in their coffee-drinking courtesy, and Said himself was more than any large of this gentlemanlike imposture. He was full of swaggering complaisance and compliments to an humbler person. With what suavity could he encourage and gently to compel a man, and rising himself yield him parcel of another man's room. In such fashions, Said showed himself a bountiful great man, who indeed was the greatest niggard. The cups are drunk twice about, each one sipping after other's lips, without misliking. To the great coffee shakes, the cup may be filled more times, but this is an adulation of the coffee server. There are some of the Fukhara shakes so delicate sybarites that of these 3 bitter sips to draw out all their joyance, twisting, turning, and tossing again the cup, they could make 10. The coffee service ended, the grounds are poured out from the small into the great store pot that is reserved full of warm water. With a bitter lay, the nomads will make their next bever and think they spare coffee. Here is an Arabian recipe for making coffee as given by Qadi Qadad, the best informed man of this time. Taj Eddin Aid al-Makna ben Yaqub Maki Molki, chief of all the contents of Hejaz, may God have mercy on him. I learned it when once in his company at the time of the holy feasts. He informed me that nothing is more beneficial than to drink cold water before coffee, because it lengthens the dryness of the coffee, and thus, taken, it does not cause insomnia to the same degree. Poet did not forget to explain this manner of taking coffee. As with art is prepared, one should drink it with art. The mere commonplace drinks one observes with free heart, but this once with care, from the bright flame removed, and the lime set aside that its value has proved. Take it first in deep draughts, meditative and slow. Quit it now resume, thus imbibe with gusto. While charming the palate, it burns yet enchants. In the hour of its triumph, the virtue it grants penetrates every tissue, its powers condense, circulate cheering warmth, bring new life to each sense. From the cauldron profound, spiced aromas unseen, mount to tease and delight your olfactories keen, the while you inhale with felicity fraught the enchanting perfume that a zephyr has brought. End of section 64.